You asked me about the nature of our relationship.
I needed to know who I was talking to. Were you my friend across the fire? Who are you?
And if I can't answer that question?
It's terribly difficult to recruit for a Secret Service. You're looking for somebody who's a bit bad, but at the same time loyal. There's a type, and I fitted perfectly.
In your memoir, you say none of it's true. It's as I imagined it.
When I was in MI6, it wasn't enough for me. So what I did was reinvent the secret world and fill my own people with it.
Why is betrayal an important concept to you?
It has a long family background. Writing is a journey of self-discovery. I see my own life as a succession of embraces and escapes.
Maybe this is an interrogation. Maybe I am self-deceived.
I don't know, but I'll answer any question you wish me to answer as truthfully as I can.
Can you hear me, Errol?
Yes, I can.
How are you?
I think I'm okay. I should get a doctor's report.
Hi, this is Chuck Braverman. This is another episode of Westdoc Online. We're brought to you by Real Screen Summit, which is coming up in January in New Orleans. It's a terrific event for filmmakers. You can register and get information by clicking on the logo at the bottom of our westdoconline.com page. And right next to that is the icon for the Riverside FM platform, which we are using. If you want information and a 15% discount, click on that. Now, today we have an exceptional filmmaker. He's an Oscar winner, and he's made dozens of films. His day job is directing commercials, which you've probably seen many more of than you're aware of. And he changed everything with The Thin Blue Line, which was the modernization of the documentary. And some say it was the downfall. Others say it was the beginning of the best kind of filmmaking. Let's meet the filmmaker, Errol Morris. Can you tell me, how did this film, The Pigeon Tunnel, come about? What was the beginnings and how did it happen?
I was in London working on a different project. A producer friend of mine was involved with the Le Carré project and suggested to me, you should do a film with John le Carré, with David Corwell. Let's see if we can make it happen. And a dinner was organized. I met David Cornwell, and Apple was interested in financing the film. He wanted to hear the hand clap again, and that was it.
So if Apple was involved, were they the client, or are you at that point where you say, I'm going to make the film and I'll show it to you when it's done, or were they sort of partners going through the production process?
The latter. It was a film they were interested in participating in, financing, and I often tell people, they say, well, I have a movie that you might really be interested in making, and I say, well, great, do you have a way to finance it? And this all worked out extremely well. There was some endless discussion of whether it should be a series or it should be a single film. Originally, this was going to be an adaptation with multiple parts. Certainly, there's enough material in the Pigeon Tunnel for a dozen movies. But a decision was made to make it into a single movie. And here it is.
Were you working with Molly Thompson at Apple? Was she?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I've known Molly for a long time. She's
Likewise.
a friend, and I like
This is
her
the
a lot.
second movie we've made together. We made The Unknown Known together, the
Oh.
movie about Donald Rumsfeld.
What was from the time you thought, okay, I'm going to make this film, to now, roughly, what period of time? I know that it started before the pandemic, right? So this has been at least 3 or 4 years.
Yes. It took a long, long, long time. I'm not sure why. Part was that whenever I try to make movies that are hybrids, which is now almost always, executives don't necessarily know what to make of them. Is this a drama? Is it a documentary? What is it? And I think that there was some delay with people trying to wrap their heads around, what is this movie? How can I even really define it?
Well, that begs the question. What is it? Is it a drama? I mean, let me preface the question by saying I think your documentaries, if that's the answer, are theatrical, much more theatrical in their presentation, and much more high end than certainly most documentaries. So how would you define, let's say, the Pigeon Tunnel? What is this film?
It's a movie.
Well, that's too generic, isn't it? Is it a documentary also, or no?
There are documentary elements in it, of course. There's an interview with David Corwell. That is the central documentary element in it. But there are high-end pieces of drama strewn throughout this movie. So you tell me, I don't know.
I would say it's a movie also. I mean, and I think that's one of my notes here about to ask you, because I think what you have done to the documentary field, of course, is you changed everything with The Thin Blue Line. And I think some people obviously were taken aback by that at the time.
When we started putting the facts together on how much information we actually had, we found out we didn't have anything.
I think The Thin Blue Line did change everything, didn't it? In terms of how we feel about recreations and documentaries in one place.
Certainly it was a heretical film. I wasn't present, but I always hear the story about how The Thin Blue Line was screened for the documentary committee at the Academy. And if members of the committee didn't want to see the film, they would turn on their flashlights and wave them. And the first dramatic piece, which is really a couple of minutes into The Thin Blue Line, flashlights started waving back and forth. The movie was turned off. I don't think that they saw more than 10 minutes of it, because for many people it wasn't a documentary. There's something wrong about the whole methodology of how the movie was produced, how it was put together, how it was exhibited, probably everything about it. And now it's not so unusual. Let's just put it that way.
I assume that you're a member of the Academy now. Is that correct?
Well, I won an Oscar, so yes.
So I've been a member of the Academy for 40 years, and I was a member during that period of time, but I must say I have no memory of that particular incident, and I'm sort of surprised when to some degree, I'm surprised at that, because of the quality of the film was so good, and it was so, revolutionary. Maybe that was the problem at the time. I don't know. I do remember being in a meeting a meeting for the public at the Academy in Hollywood years later, but it must have been 10 or 15 years ago. And Bruce Davis was asked by me and from the audience, don't we want the best films, or something to that effect? We always want the best films. And Bruce at the time said, no, we have too many films now that are trying. We don't want the best films. And I was sort of shocked. So it gives you a tone for maybe what was going on at the Academy. And I'm going to apologize for the Academy in hindsight and say, you know, you certainly did get the short end, but at the end of the day, you have your Oscar, and the film is, in my mind, revolutionary, you know, so there you go.
Well, the film introduced me to a whole new way of putting films together. I'm not just going to say putting documentary films together, but a whole new way of putting films together. And I have a film that was the music co-written by Philip Glass. And this was our first collaboration, The Thin Blue Line. Philip Glass wrote an exquisite score for The Thin Blue Line, one of the really, truly great motion picture scores. And it was the beginning of our collaboration. And I got to see him. I hadn't seen him in years here at the New York Film Festival. I had to tell him what an enormous difference he has made in my life and in my work.
Well, I'm glad you
So-
brought that up, because you're preaching to the choir again, Errol, and that I love Philip Glass. He's one of my favorite of all times. I've actually used some of his music in a documentary I made years ago called Abused. I never thought I'd be able to get, you know, I told my son I wanted him, he was doing the music at the time before me, and I said, I wish you would do something like this Philip Glass music. And he said, well, why don't you call up the publisher and see if you can get it? I said, no, I'll never be able to get it. And I called him, and sure enough, I was able to get some Philip Glass, probably because of your films and your influence. So I love Philip Glass, and I think the score, and he worked with somebody else. So did you do half the score, and the other credited composer did?
Well, they've worked together on a number of projects. And we did a project together called Tales from the Loop, but this is an opportunity to have them collaborate again, and it worked extraordinarily well. I love the score for the Pigeon Tunnel.
How much time did you actually spend filming David Corwell? Was
4 days.
4 days. And can you tell me a little bit about the crew? I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear a little bit about it. What was the size of the crew?
Well, it's probably 40 or 50 people.
Oh, why did I read somewhere that it was 100 people?
Well, that was the reenactments, the drama pieces were done in Hungary. That's a bigger crew.
But you had 40 people, and how many cameras?
Maybe more, maybe 50. It's something that I don't sit there with a calculator.
Well, you could tell me how many camera angles you had typically in
5.
5. It seemed like 25 in watching the film. It seemed like a lot more.
No.
And ironically,
A lot of mirrors.
a lot of smoke and mirrors.
No smoke, a lot of mirrors.
And you invented a piece of hardware which has become pretty popular in the documentary world also, called the Interatron. Is that correct?
Yep.
And you used it.
Yes, I did.
And you used it in this film, where in effect it's kind of like setting up a teleprompter, except instead of seeing the teleprompter, the person is looking at you through a set of mirrors, right? So he ends up looking directly at the lens instead of off lens.
It's a pair of teleprompters, not just one. So you need 2 for it to work.
So when a filmmaker rents an Interatron at a camera rental place, or I guess, is that something that you have actually produced, or did somebody else take that on and do that? Just
I never patented it. According to U.S. patent law, you have a year from the first public mention of a new invention. And the New York Times did an article about my film with Stephen Hawking, A Brief History of Time, and identified the Interrotron in the New York Times Magazine. And essentially, I had a year from that public mention of the device to patent it, and I never knew this was part of patent law.
And
And by
someone
the
else
time
has
I-
taken that machine and is producing it and calling it the Interrotron? I didn't
Yep.
know. Wow.
Lots of people use it, yes.
The Pigeon Tunnel is a pretty unusual name. And for somebody, I mean, I've seen the film twice now and it seems sort of obvious. But if you haven't seen the film, you'll think, what the heck is this? You want to tell us what the metaphor of the Pigeon Tunnel is all about, please?
It's the frontispiece of his book titled The Pigeon Tunnel. He tells a story about a casino in Monte Carlo where there were pigeons raised, hatched on the roof of the casino. And I guess this was a treat offered to gamblers. The pigeons would be taken out of their coops, sent down this long tunnel, dark tunnel, flying out over the Mediterranean. And on the roof of the casino, there would be gamblers with guns shooting at them. Sometimes killing them, sometimes winging them, sometimes they just get away scot-free. And the pigeons that got away scot-free would invariably return to the roof, go back to their coops, and then be sent out on another day. So it's a story very much a kind of Sisyphean story of repetition, again and again and again and again, interrupted by death. And if you like, it's a story, clearly a parable that David loved. He mentions that he had thought of it as a title for, I don't know, maybe half a dozen novels over the years. And like old, really, really good parables, like Kafka, you don't know exactly what it means, but it suggests a kind of universe of possibilities. Who are the pigeons? Are they us?
That's what I was going to say that seemed the most obvious. It's a parable about a metaphor of most civilians, right? Of most people.
Yes.
So your docs, again, I think getting back to the whole the theme, I found, doing a little research and back history of you, I found it pretty interesting when you were doing, was it Gates of Heaven, that you had this cameraman up from LA and fired him after a couple of days because
one day,
the first day, the last day. You want to tell us a little bit about why this unnamed cameraman was fired?
Well, I can name him. He's become quite famous and he's quite a good cameraman. I saw him quite recently at the Telluride Film Festival. Ed Lockman. And the problem was, and maybe there's a problem throughout my career, it really actually has been, why lie? The problem is that I do things differently. Probably 400 or 500 years ago, I'd just be summarily shot. So maybe modernity does have some virtue. I did not want to make a documentary with a handheld camera. Who refuses to use handheld material while making nonfiction? It was considered to be heretical. You don't do that. It's a no-no. Cut that out right now, Mr. Morris. And Ed said, well, I know how to do these. Ed had shot many documentaries, some for Werner Herzog. I know how to do this. "Well, just give me the camera." And so he started filming. We were watching the exhumation of pet graves at a pet cemetery in Los Altos, California. He started shooting handheld. I said, "No, I don't want you to do that. I want the camera on a tripod." "No, you don't understand how to make these movies." "I don't care whether I understand how to make these movies or not. I don't want the camera handheld, okay?" And I ended up pushing him into a doggy grave. I didn't shovel dirt on him, but I did push him into the grave.
And your feeling about handheld photography, cinematography, beside for your own films, do you think it's okay for the Maisel brothers and Leacock Pennybaker?
I've used it in my own films, but I did not want it used in that particular scene. It was a no-no.
So I assume, well, maybe this is an unfair question, but I assume you're a fan of like Leacock Pennybaker and the Maisels and that sort of thing, which is, I don't know if they even own a tripod, right?
I'm a fan of some of their films. Salesman is a great film. Grey Gardens is a great film. I'm not saying that I don't think it should ever be used by anybody, but if you're a filmmaker, presumably you should have some say over how your film is photographed.
Well, absolutely. Are you friends with Ed now, or is he?
We actually talk. Actually, we are friends. Amazingly enough.
What was your obsession with the Robert Fenton stills from the Crimean War? I didn't quite understand how you came into that controversial setup and finally figured out which was the real picture and which was the not real picture. Did you?
They were both real pictures. One
but I mean,
was
which
no
was
more
the,
real than the others.
well, you know what I mean, right?
I don't.
Well, one was changed to give an impression of more action, apparently, right?
What fascinated me was that it was written about by Susan Sontag. And she had ordered these two pictures. The pictures are obviously taken on a tripod in the same position. And in one of the pictures, there were cannonballs on the road, this dirt roadway that bisects the picture. And in another, there were not. And Susan Sontag had ordered the pictures saying, this one came before that one. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, how do you know? How do you know that A came before B or B became before A? How do you know these things? And that was the beginning of an investigation into these two photographs, these two Fenton photographs that took me all the way to the Crimea.
Getting back to the Pigeon Tunnel for a minute, was there, because of the way you shoot and the fact that I'm assuming the screen ratio looked like it was about 2:3:5 to 1. I mean, it's a widescreen theatrical type presentation. Was there a conversation, or is the film actually going to be released in theaters before it's on Apple TV Plus?
I believe it will be, yes.
Oh. And was there much conversation of, how long are we going to have this in theaters, or is it just going to be in theaters to qualify it?
Well,
or
I hope it'll be in theaters for as long as possible. I like widescreen format. Maybe not for everything, but for this, I think it worked very, very well.
I ask most of the filmmakers, and I usually get a fairly, at least approximation. Can you tell me about what the budget was for this film?
I've been told I was working with all of these companies, with Apple and with David Cornwell's holding company, which is now run by his sons, Stephen and Simon, the ink factory. And I believe it's somewhere close to $10 million, but I don't know for sure.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, it's of course pocket change for Apple, but it's still, that's sort of an amazing number, don't you think? For something that's, we consider a documentary these days, right? But
I'll let you decide.
that's pretty shocking. Well,
Why, you don't think it deserved it? You don't think the imagery was good enough?
no, I didn't mean that at all. I think if you put it in context of 100 documentaries that we know the titles of, I don't think we can name too many that approach that budget. But I do think it's worth it, because I do think what you do is you do create theatrical properties, whether they're based on fiction or nonfiction, and I think they're entertaining, and I think they're compelling, and certainly in the world of motion pictures, 10 million is a drop in the bucket, but in what we think of as documentaries, it's a pretty good sized budget. Don't you agree?
I know that we shot in Budapest. Almost all of the dramatic material was shot in Hungary. At the ink factory, they didn't quite like the digital material with the shooting of the pigeons. That was redone many times. A lot of the stuff involved extensive optical work and computer graphics. The whole casino roof, which you think you're looking at the Mediterranean, overlooks a parking lot. That's all green screen. So unusual, I suppose, in documentary, there's extensive post-production work that is being done on all of the material.
You answered one of my questions that I was almost afraid to ask, and that's about the pigeons. And I'm so glad to hear that was digital, because it was very real looking. And
well, not all the pigeons were digital, but the shooting of the pigeons was digital.
Well, that's what
yes.
I meant. Well, thanks, Errol, very much. I'm
Thank
so
you
happy
very much
that we had a chance to chat for a little while. I think the film is fabulous, and I think everybody should take a look at it as soon as they can, whether it's in a theater, which probably be the best place to see it, and on Apple TV Plus. Thank you.